Hi everyone, I hope you're all doing great. So today we're going to start with unit number 6, which is called Everyday. So in this unit, of course, we're going to be talking about the things you do every single day, your daily routine, right? And you're going to be saying as well where and when you have meals. Meals, remember that examples of meals are breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So those are meals, right? The meals of the day. Now let's see. Here we have some images of activities you do on a normal day. So people often do these things in the morning, right? So listen and practice. So I'm going to be reading the expressions for you. We have a shower, have breakfast, have tea or coffee, get up, read the paper, watch TV, listen to the radio, wake up, and go to work or school. So, things about the things you do on a normal basis. What is the first thing you do in the morning? Of course, wake up, right? What do you do next? Do you watch TV or do you get up? Maybe you can have a look at your social media on your cell phone and then get up, right? Then probably have a shower and have breakfast. If you pay attention to these two expressions here, have is used as a synonym for the verb eat, right? So have breakfast, have tea or coffee, right? So for the food you have in the morning. So try to put the list of things in order according to what you do when you wake up. Now we're going to be looking at Emma's daily routine. So she's Emma, she's at work in that image, right? So what do you think is Emma's job if you look closely at the image? What do you think is her job? She is a teacher, right? So she's teaching English to some students. So do you think that Emma, as a teacher, do you think that she gets up early in the morning or late? We are going to find out now, and the idea is for you to put the expressions or the activities in order as she mentions them. So the first thing she does is to get up, and then we have number 2, 3, 4, and then to 6. So listen and put the actions in order. All right?
Track 2.
I teach English to business people, so I get up very early. I get up at 6 o'clock. I have a quick shower, then I have a cup of coffee, and then I go to work. I teach from 7 o'clock until 9 o'clock, and then I go to a cafe and have breakfast, and I read the newspaper. Then I go and teach another 2 hours before lunch.
Okay, so remember that if you need to listen again, you can pause the video and go back. All right. So we have number 1, she gets up. Number 2, she has a shower, right? Then she has a cup of coffee and she goes to work, right? Number 5, after her lessons, she has breakfast. And finally, when she's having breakfast at a cafe, she reads the newspaper. Very good. Now, let's try to add all of these expressions to this table. And if you pay attention, we have 2 different categories, right? Expressions we use with the subject I, the pronoun I, and the pronoun he or she. So we have I get up, I have coffee, I go to work, I read the paper, I have breakfast, and I have a shower, right? But what happens here is that remember that when we use the subject he or she, we're going to change the verb a bit, right? It's not a major change, it's just a bit. So we say she gets up. She has coffee. She goes to work. What else? She reads the newspaper or the paper in this case. She has breakfast and then she has a shower, right? So that's the change of the verb that we do, right? We add an s at the end of the verb. In the case of go, we add an es, right? The verb has changes completely, right? It's not has, it's has. There we go. Now, let's keep analyzing some more routines. So here we have two people that work in a 24-hour supermarket. We have Simon here, right, and Carla, right? So they both work in 24-hour supermarkets. Now, let's read what they have to say about their routines. So Carla says, I get up at 5 in the morning and go to work at about 6. I start work at 7. I finish work at 3 in the afternoon, then come home and have lunch. Simon, on the other hand, says, I get up at about 10 or 11. I start work at 2 in the afternoon. I finish work at 10 in the evening and I usually come home at about 11. Then I watch TV and go to bed at 2 or 3 in the morning, right? So very late. Now let's answer these questions. So who works in the morning? Carla, right? She works in the morning. Who works in the afternoon? Both, right? Carla and Simon both work in the afternoon. Who works in the evening? Simon, right? And when they are both at work, from 2 to 3, right? From 2 in the afternoon to 3 in the afternoon because he starts working at 2 and she finishes at 3. So there's 1 hour when they are both at work. Very good. Find pairs of expressions and add them to the table. So here we have kind of opposite expressions. So we have get up and go to bed, go to work and come home, go to work and then come home, and start work and finish work, of course. Very good. So, a friend talks about salmon. Read and add the verbs to the table. So this friend says, he gets up at about 10 or 11, but he only starts work at 2 in the afternoon. He finishes work at 10 in the evening and he usually comes home at about 11. Then he watches TV and he goes to bed at about 2 or 3 in the morning, right? So if you pay attention, the difference in this case is that we're using the subject he. So we say he gets up, he starts work, he finishes work, he comes home, he watches TV and goes to bed, right? So when we talk about the third person singular, he, right, we're going to be changing the verb a bit. So we say, I get up, she or he gets up. I start, and he or she starts, right? And I come, and she or he comes, right? Very good. What about these verbs? I go and he or she goes, goes, finishes, and watches. Very good. So, can you see how verbs in A and B are different? What is the difference between these two verbs, these two categories of verbs? So in this case, the only thing we do is add an S at the end, right? Come and comes, start and starts. But in the cases of go, finish, and watch, we're going to include ES, ES, and ES as well. So the rule of this is very simple. We have some irregular verbs, in this case like go and have, and for verbs that end in sh like finish or ch, there we have ch or x or f, we're going to add es at the end, right? So we have, for example, the verb fix, we say fixes, right? We have the verb wash and we have washes. Yes? We have the verb catch and we say catches. Yes? So there you can identify the change. We're going to be practicing with more exercises on our virtual classroom. Okay? So let's move on. Now, as I told you before, we're going to be talking about meals, right? Remember that meals are lunch, breakfast, right, and dinner. And of course, the things you eat during the day as well, right? For example, a snack maybe, that's also a meal, right? And in this case here we have that we usually use the verb have when we talk about food. So I have breakfast, I have lunch, I have a sandwich, and I have a cup of coffee. We can use have for food and drinks at the same time. All right? So, four people say where they have lunch. Listen and who says these things. So, we're going to listen to four people. So, you write number 1, 2, 3, or 4 according to what the people are saying. So, let's listen.
Track 3.
1,
I usually have lunch in a cafe near my office. I have a sandwich and a cup of coffee usually.
2,
I usually have lunch at home. I sometimes go out to a restaurant, but it's quite expensive.
3,
Well, I always have lunch at work. We have a really good restaurant at the factory, so we all eat there.
4,
I never have lunch. I don't have time. I just have a bar of chocolate.
Okay, so the first person said, number 1, we have, I have lunch in a cafe, right? Then he said, I have a sandwich and a cup of coffee. Very good. Number 2 says, I have lunch at home. Number 3 says, I have lunch in a restaurant. And number 4 says that he doesn't have time to have lunch, so he only has a bar of chocolate. So sad, right? However, chocolate's good, so maybe that's good for him, right? Now, we're going to listen again, and now you're going to identify with the words from the box, right? And put them in the spaces here, right? So complete this with these words. So these words are adverbs of frequency. They say how often you do certain things. Yes? These are adverbs of frequency. That's the name, frequency. Now let's listen.
Track 3.
1,
I usually have lunch in a cafe near my office. I have a sandwich and a cup of coffee usually.
2,
I usually have lunch at home. I sometimes go out to a restaurant, but it's quite expensive.
3.
Well, I always have lunch at work. We have a really good restaurant at the factory, so we all eat there.
4. I never have lunch. I don't have time. I just have a bar of chocolate.
Okay, so we have number 1. She says, I usually have lunch in a cafe. I usually have lunch in a cafe. Number 2 says, I sometimes go out to a restaurant. I sometimes go out to a restaurant. Number 3 says, I always have lunch at work. I always have lunch at work. And the last one says, I never have lunch. Did you have them correct? Very good. Now here we have a scale that goes from 0% of times to 100. So can you put the words sometimes, never, always, and usually in the correct order? So pause the video and do the activity. Are you ready? So let's see. When you do something 0% of time, that means that you never do it. Yes? On the contrary, 100% of times means always. Yes? And we have 2 in-betweens. We have here sometimes, algunas veces, sometimes, and usually, usualmente, right? So most of the time, but not always. So let's see. Imagine that you get up from Monday to Friday at 7 o'clock, and then on Saturdays and Sundays you get up at 11. So you can say, I usually get up at 7 o'clock, 5 days of the week, right? And then you can also say, I sometimes get up at 10 or 11, right, during the weekend. Yeah, so sometimes is less than usually. Now make the sentences true for you at always, usually, sometimes, or never. So complete these sentences with the information that is true of you. Okay, so I'm going to share my answers with you. So, I sometimes have a big breakfast. I always have coffee with my breakfast. I usually have lunch at home, and I sometimes have lunch in a restaurant. I always have breakfast at home, but I never have breakfast before 7 a.m. Now we're going to go to page 107 to have a last look at the use of adverbs of frequency. So let's pay attention to this part. Let's see. So we have here the scale, right? Always, often, or usually, sometimes, and then never, right? So we have here 2 people. He says, I read the paper every morning. That means always, right? Or I eat rice every day. We can also say every night, every afternoon, every evening. So you can say, for example, I always watch TV at night, or I watch TV every night. Both are correct. So always and never come before the main verb. Right? So pay attention. We have I never eat meat. She always gets up very early. So we have the subject, the adverb of frequency, and then the verb. never, and always. The same happens for often, usually, and sometimes. They can come before the main verb, like in the examples above. We sometimes go to the theater, or he usually comes home at 5. But these words, often, usually, and sometimes, can also come at the beginning or at the end of a sentence. So if we divide this, we say, we go to theaters sometimes, or we can say, we sometimes go to the theater. Finally, we have at the beginning, usually he comes home at 5, or we can say, he usually comes home at 5. He comes usually home, that's incorrect, right? So pay attention to that. Now, pronunciation below, say usually as in this, using these symbols, usually, right? Like a U sound. It's not usually, it's usually. And then we can say often, or often. Both are correct. Often or often. Yes? So that is going to be the end of today's lesson. As always, I'm going to leave you a ton of exercises for you to practice on our virtual classroom. And you can write me back in case you have any questions. All right? I will see you very soon. Bye-bye.